Well, great. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank all of you for joining us on the inaugural Education Unmuted Conversations with me, sponsored by A+ Colorado. I am Van Schoales. I'm the president of A+ Colorado. We're a research and advocacy organization focused on improving public education here in Colorado. And this is the start of a series where be having a half-hour conversation with interesting folks doing remarkable work in education with all sorts of different experiences. And just a little bit about the format for this. I'll be asking my guests a series of questions for about 20 minutes. You can go to the chat and feel free to identify yourself and or ask a question, and I'll try and get to the questions in the last 10 minutes or thereabouts of the conversation. This is meant to be a half an hour. It's meant to be pretty informal. As I said in my email, there will be no PowerPoints. There will be no speeches. It's just meant to be a starter for folks to explore other ideas or to reflect on their own thinking about education. So why don't we get started? Thanks all for joining. My guest today is an old friend, Ron Sally. He is up to my left. I'm not sure where he is on your screen, but Ron is a remarkable business leader. He's been in the sports business for a number of years, lawyer, not practicing lawyer, I gather, philanthropist, mentor, educator, and he wore number 12, as I understand from my research, and played for the famous Tampa Bay Bandits. I didn't remember the Tampa Bay Bandits, and was a QB for the Bandits, if my research of the internet's correct. So I'd like to welcome Ron for joining us, and maybe if we could just start with a project that he has developed. He comes from North St. Louis, and wondering if he could just start out by talking a little bit about his program, Greer Street, and the Greer Street project, and a little bit about Greer Street. So welcome and thank you for joining us, Ron.
Yeah, thank you. I think the Tampa Bay Bandits are probably more infamous at this point than famous. So I wouldn't encourage anybody to do any research in that regard. But thanks, Van, for having me. I appreciate everybody else who's joining the conversation. Project Greer Street, that's GREER, is an academic enrichment program and pipeline initiative that my wife and I started roughly about a decade ago. And the focus of the program, it's based here in Denver. We worked at a number of different high schools. Currently, we have a class that's at East High School. And it's really a program that is specifically targeted at African-American males in high school. And our goal with the program is to be a tremendous resource for these students in really, I would say, a holistic approach to both their high school experience and specifically with their educational and academic progress in high school. We have a myriad of different goals, one of which is very, very ambitious, is for all of the students to be admitted to an elite college or university in America. And the reason that we have such lofty goals for the students is that part of, I think, the challenge with this particular demographic is that the expectations haven't been at a level, at least that I think should be appropriate, combined with the fact that if for whatever reason, if you don't achieve your ultimate goal, Our thought is that they'll be in really good shape, um, even if they fall just a little bit short of that because the goals are so ambitious. It's a 4-year program. We start with the students. We have a cohort. It's a volunteer program. We start with them in freshman year, and then we're with them through senior year through graduation. Each year has a little bit different focus, depending upon what they are really focused on in high school. So between those 4 years, or as we like to say, 31 months, is the time that we spend with them. The program is comprised of my meeting with the students roughly every 7 to 10 days for about 60 or 70 minutes, with the topics and the subject matter for each session varies. With, I would say, the one common denominator is really a focus on academic excellence and really teaching the students about what's required in order to achieve that level of success academically. We like to call it the tactics for success. In addition to what we're addressing from an academic and educational standpoint, there's a variety of different things that we address that are important, some of which are unique to African American males, others that are broader than that, quite frankly. And, part of our thought when we started it was that we wanted to be an information resource because we recognized there was a pretty significant gulf between what these students were receiving, not something that was intentional, but it just existed, and what other students may have access to. And the great thing about being in Denver in general, at least from my experience, is that the information and the resources actually exist in a variety of different places. But frequently you have to have what I like to call education Sherpa to provide that guidance for you to know where to look, who to engage with, what questions to ask, etc. So that's a rough overview of the program. It's been really successful. I would say over the last several years that we've done it, we have students that have been admitted to more than 50 colleges and universities across the country, starting, at the very top with the Princetons and Harvards and Stanfords. And our students have earned more than $5 million in college scholarships and institutional grants along the way also. Our holistic approach is really to prepare them to compete for the rest of their lives as African American males. And so coming out of it, regardless of where you go to college, regardless of where you're going to be working, a lot of the things that we teach them are things that probably everybody on this call has learned at some point. Maybe it was in high school, maybe it was in college, maybe you naturally acquired it just being in the homes that you grew up in. But it's that type of secret sauce, if you will, or sweet science of success that we share with the students. Hey, Van, I can't hear you. Are you on mute? Van?
There I am.
Oh,
Sorry.
there you go. Okay.
Yeah. So why
And
is
I hope I wasn't on mute for the last 3 or 4 minutes.
No, we can hear you. Great. Thanks. Why is it called Greer Street?
Yeah, the name comes from the street that I spent my childhood on in North St. Louis. And North St. Louis, I would say, is sadly kind of your stereotypical inner city hellhole in America. And I wanted to, because of how that experience shaped me and the lessons that I learned from that experience, I wanted to pay tribute to that. And so that's why it's called Project Greer Street.
And why? What happened? What inspired you to do this a decade or more ago?
It was a couple things. I had learned about several outcomes for African American males who were graduating from high school that I felt were, and this was back in like roughly 2008, 2009, and that I felt were, as far as I was concerned, I was perplexed as to the outcomes. Yeah, they were graduating from high school, but they were not going to college. The ones that were going to college were aspiring to go to the local community college. And it really troubled me that that was it, at least in 2008. And this was running simultaneous with the historic presidential campaign of Barack Obama. And I thought to myself, and particularly in a place like Denver, which is much different than North St. Louis, west side of Chicago, Newark, New Jersey, this was a place that that had resources, that had success stories, had a lot of the benefits that come with what's required in order to be successful. So I thought that there must be a reason why this is occurring in 2008, not 1940. And I really began to look into it a little bit. And what became clear to me that it was, there was it was a question about information. It was a question about aspirations. It's a question of just real intel at a particular stage, which is in high school, that I felt was really important because there's a lot of challenges, certainly in our educational system, a lot more than I can even name. But in my own personal narrative, I know how important high school was to me, and I really viewed it as the last opportunity in a major, major fork in the road as far as setting the foundation for creating options for life success. And for the demographic of African American males, the importance of where you go to college it's of paramount importance, unfortunately, but that's just the way it is, at least in our country.
How did you, what was the biggest challenge? I mean, to sort of move from understanding what was happening in the community and sort of what was happening in terms of young Black men graduating from high school or not graduating from high school, going on to college or not going on to college, and then being successful or not successful. Like, how did you, where'd you start, and what was the hardest thing to do in terms of getting started, in terms of moving?
I started with, and I'm really a person that's really about action. I'm fairly impatient. And really was challenged to do the program. So while I was one day complaining about the lack of what I thought were appropriate results, my wife told me and said, well, why don't you do something about it? And so being from North St. Louis, when you have your wife challenge you in your own house, you have to do something. So that's where it really started. And I told her, I said, all right, I'm going to lean into this, but I need you to lean into it with me. And so she quickly said yes, I think with the thought that nothing was going to happen. And here we are, kind of still doing it. So I was fortunate enough to have the support, at least when I first started, Tom Boasberg, who I met with and kind of laid out what my thoughts were and plans, what I'd like to do. And then, had a great opportunity at least to get started. John Youngquist, who's the principal at East High School, was willing to give it a chance. And I think part of what resonated was, it was something new, it was something different. It was a lot of outside the box thinking, and the thought that was, well, look, this could be a value add to everything that's going on. And so I was fortunate in that respect, at least to get started. I'd say the biggest obstacle, maybe initially, was just getting buy-in from the parents and the students. Anytime somebody, a parent, trusts you with their child, it's a big, big deal. And so I think getting over that hump, establishing credibility with the students and with the parents, and I think the just unrelenting consistency of what we were teaching the kids and how we were going about it was something that was really critical. And so once we kind of cleared that hurdle, it made things a lot easier. So I think that was probably the well, I'd say, and the other thing that was also at play was that not being a Denver native, not, whatever, local high school, Denver is somewhat provincial in that regard as far as where you went to high school, I think was a little bit of a hurdle. And recognizing that my experience, while similar, was, I haven't walked the halls of the same high schools that the students have. But I think that's also beneficial because it gave them some perspective on, I had many students that felt as though they were, growing up in whatever part of Denver or Aurora was the equivalent of, being in the middle of Vietnam. And I'd be the first one to tell them this is a cakewalk compared to some other cities. So that was some good perspective, I think, for them to have. And it, definitely contributed to a broader context of, their learning and acquiring a lot of knowledge that we shared in the program.
Yeah, maybe, and by the way, folks, audience folks, please go to the chat. We're going to move to looking at audience questions in a moment. So please throw out some questions in the chat. But sort of building a little bit on what you just described, we were both born in 1963. We were chatting just before this started that, and I lived not far from North St. Louis as a kid, and one of my earliest memories were being in civil rights and anti-war marches in 1968. And we're fortunate to be in a time right now because of Black Lives Matter and because of this sort of awakening around the racial injustice and structural racism in our country, that there's, I think, another opportunity like there was in the late 60s to sort of take a close look at sort of all of our systems, and in particular public education, and begin to rethink how we do it. And I think you have Ron, you have just a really unique and interesting perspective because of the program. And just wondering, like, what are your thoughts? How might we begin to tackle rethinking high school so that instead of them being places where we sort and select, and some kids who come in with a lot of privilege end up sort of accelerating, and kids without privilege end up going off onto other tracks. What advice would you have for us that are working on the system or in the system?
Yeah, I wouldn't
racism.
Yeah, I wouldn't pretend to be able to, unfortunately, answer that question in a comprehensive way. And I'm sure a lot of people that are on the phone are far more advanced from an educational standpoint and being part of the system than I have been. I do think it's important to, not that this is not occurring, but I think it's just challenging with all of the different issues and challenges and that public education faces in this country, to stay focused on the most important thing, which is the students and what the purpose of receiving an education is. And so, at the end of the day, we want to have, I think, productive American citizens. And people are not going to all achieve at the same level. But, for most people, the value of their high school education, and in many respects, regardless of whether they go to college or where they go to college, is really a key foundation for them, where they learn a lot of the skills, or they should be learning a lot of the skills that are going to be necessary for them to be productive citizens. So I think by having what I would say a consistent focus on that, and I would imagine it becomes really difficult with all the issues that you have, but sometimes I feel as though that gets maybe lost in the wash a little bit with all of the different issues that public education has to address. So I know for me and for the program, what I wanted to do is to have a laser beam focus, and to be in a particular lane of traffic that I had expertise in and was confident to deliver what I said I was going to deliver, and to do it in a way that I felt that was going to be effective. So I think that's also important too. I think you need to have people in the right positions to do whatever it is they're tasked with doing, and they should be equipped with what they need in order to be successful. Um, so I think those are some of the things, at least from my experience, that become important.
Yeah, I think the laser focus, I think the relationships and the mentorship and building those relationships. And curious, we had a few questions. Peter Drogi asked, do you, what happens after, once they enter college and happens after college? What are those relationships? Is that part of the program?
No, it's not formally part of the program, but the reality is that the relationships that I build with the students really in a really formative stage of their lives carries on. I mean, I stay in contact with all of the students, but there's different levels of contact while they're in college and certainly after they graduate. And with some of the students, it ebbs and flows. I mean, there'll be, maybe a lack of communication, but, it's kind of for a couple months, and then we circle back, or reconnect. And I do a lot of proactive efforts to do that, to make sure that they understand that they do have or continue to have me as a resource, and a point of contact, which is really, important, because for many of these students who are first generation college students, whether it's going to college, whether it's the first job, whether it's moving out of Denver, moving out of Colorado, all of this is new experience for them. And to be able to have unvarnished, or a person with an unvarnished input, opinion that they know and trust, that has credibility, I think is something that's important to them. So we've had, recently I had a Zoom call with all the members of a class that had, graduated from college, just to touch base and to continue to network and share information, and it's really about what I can do, my wife can do to assist them along their life journey. So,
And what about, in that regard, what about career stuff, or is that part of the program?
yeah, well, the program, the quote unquote program, is really a high school program. The informal piece that I just described is something that's really continues, for the rest of our lives, quite frankly. It's interesting from a career standpoint. I had a discussion or a negotiation preparation session with one of the students probably a couple months ago, who was in a job, who was been offered a promotion, and he just really wanted to talk about all the different things that he should be thinking about, how he should approach it. And it was really, really rewarding, and I think for both of us, it was great to be able to share my wisdom and information with him. I know he took a lot from it, and it wound up being a great result. Well, everybody on this call, in their respective careers, if you haven't, I probably wish they had some type of almost conciliary that you can reach out to talk about different career issues and challenges that you're having. And so, that is continuing on. I think the thing that really makes me the happiest, however, is the connectivity between the students as they continue in their lives. Part of what we preach when they're in high school is that you guys, the students in these classes, should stay connected for the rest of your lives. And so, no different than somebody who goes to Columbia University and is friends for life with their freshman roommate. And that's where they establish that bond. This is similar for Project Greer Street. And so that is also began to happen organically, which is awesome. And I think the benefit that we have now is that we've had some older students who are now connecting with the younger students and the students that are in high school. So I've had guest speakers come in even before the pandemic to talk to the freshmen about their experience. So rather than having to listen to me, who, the students regard as, well, you're no different than your oldest Satchel Paige. So why should we listen to you? there's, there's somebody who has gone to the same high school, has some of the same teachers, walked the same halls, at least not as long ago as one might think. But some of the alums, it's funny because they come out of it saying, wow, I feel old. It's only been 3 or 4 years.
That's great. I had a question from Normina around how you prepare uh, these students to be in and not lose themselves and be comfortable and sort of adjust to being in sort of very different environments, out of state, in elite universities. How do
Yeah.
you prep kids
Um,
for that?
yeah, it's pretty intense. I mean, I think from the very beginning, part of what we are really doing is getting them out of their comfort zone. And we spend a lot of time talking about you need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so, as I tell them, these kind of Denver habit trails that they've been in back and forth from the house and only going to this rec center and doing this and having the same friends from third grade, all of that gets blown up. Like if you don't have some new friends by second semester freshman year, you got to hustle. So that is just from a conceptual standpoint is where it starts. And I think really beginning to define what their world looks like, and which is a big step, for them, because most of them, you're 13, 14 years old, you haven't thought in a grand way about probably anything. And so that's where we start planting the seeds. And then it becomes, experiences. We have a experiential component to the program in which they're exposed to different things. So for instance, I take the kids to see a play at the Denver Performing Arts Center. The first time I did that, and we'll skip over how difficult it was to get them to do it. But once we got there and it began to become a reality, you would have thought we were going to China for many of these students, even though, it might have been 10 minutes from their high school. So exposure, exposure, exposure. We have the kids competing and, for opportunities to attend programs across the country while they're in high school, which is a big, big move for many of the students and their families. But, you can't expect it to go well if the first time that you leave the house and leave mommy is when you go to college. I mean, that's a recipe for disaster. So, I do a session with the mothers, and a lot of the kids are single parent mom situations. That's called Get Out of the Doorway, Mommy, because that's another obstacle, that on the one hand, the mothers don't want to have a 45-year-old infant on their couch, but on the other hand, struggle with allowing their sons, who are burgeoning young men, to develop the skills and experience to become self productive young men. And that requires some fits and starts and opportunities to fail. And so that happens in high school too. And our thought is that when you get to the point that you go into college, it is not this such a radical change that the chances for success become minimal.
Thanks, Ron. I think the work that you and your wife have done in terms of creating a remarkable example of how to bridge and support kids to move into adulthood and successfully is something that I think all of us, and in particular high school educators, could learn a lot from. So we're at time, and so I want to thank you for joining us, and I want to thank A Plus for helping to support me and putting the Zoom thing together, and all of you for taking a half an hour listen. We have recorded this. We will be putting it out next week in a variety of forms. And we have another one coming up in 2 weeks with two other friends, Julie Marsh and Aisha Hashim. Their book, Challenging the One Best System, will be the conversation in 2 weeks, and I'll shoot you a note. So thanks again for coming, and have a great afternoon.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Everybody have a great rest of your week.